Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're covering Ret Paladins in our Get Started series of guides. We'll be running you through how to build your character, before wrapping up with the section on how to deal damage. All the information in this video was gathered by several of the highest rated Rets, including myself, Mystic, one of the highest rated in Europe. Once you've finished watching this guide, you'll know exactly how to prepare for PvP at max level in Battle for Azeroth. But be aware that this guide was put together using the BFA beta and is subject to extensive change. Be sure to check out this guide in article form, which will be kept up to date once Season 1 of BFA starts. Let's start by taking a look at your best talents for PvP. In your first tier, the best option is Execution Sentence. Without going into too much detail, you should know that currently, Ret Paladins in BFA pretty much revolve around huge burst windows and little sustained damage. This clip clearly demonstrates the power of Execution Sentence, with it critting for upwards of 70k. This of course means that dropping Execution Sentence in favour of Righteous Verdict means you'll be losing one of your key spells that currently makes Rets viable in PvP. The comparison is made clear in these two clips. First, we see me playing with Crusade and Righteous Verdict, a combination that, in theory, should allow me to land a ton of hard-hitting Templar's Verdicts back-to-back in a short period of time. The reality, however, is that Templar's Verdict just doesn't hit hard enough for me to quickly drop the rogue's health. On the flip side, in this clip I'm using Execution Sentence and I'm able to kill the rogue completely alone in just 3 globals. So, although Righteous Verdict could generally be considered the best PvE talent for the overall raw increase in DPS, this does not translate well to PvP, as without the significant burst from Execution Sentence, you'll find yourself posing very little threat to your opponents. Moving on, we have your level 30 talents. While this tier may seem competitive on the surface, playing without Blade of Wrath is a huge blow to your utility due to its synergy with one of your best PvP talents, Law and Order. So, while Hammer of Wrath may seem good on paper with the additional range damage during wings and when your target is in execute range, in practice this simply isn't the case. Not only does it not hit very hard, but the potential loss of all that utility from the combination of Blade of Wrath and Law and Order simply doesn't warrant the benefits of Hammer of Wrath. The same thing applies to Fires of Justice. Although this talent is similar to Blade of Wrath in terms of how it increases your overall damage, you again lose out on the potential utility of pairing Blade of Wrath with Law and Order. This next tier is a little more simple. Fist of Justice is generally the best option, as you're usually responsible for providing stuns as a melee, and this talent can help you reduce the CD of your stun by around 30 seconds. This is especially useful in comps like Ret Hunter, where your stun is required for the hunter to trap the healer. Repentance can be a viable option if you're playing a comp that has very little healer CC, but this usually ends up being a very specific matchup based choice, and so we can't provide much insight into this as no meta has been established. On the other hand, Blinding Light seems to be a poor choice due to how slow paced BFA Arena tends to be at max level. It's also worth considering that you will usually be paired with classes that either want you to frequently use a stun, have a blind DR themselves, or that tend to spread damage onto healers, resulting in Blinding Light not being very useful in most rare comps. Next we have by far the easiest choice. Wake of Ashes is hands down the best talent in this tier, and makes the other choices not even worth discussing. Not only does it provide you with great holy power generation, it also plays a huge part in your burst when combined with Execution Sentence. Again, taking a look at that clip we showed you earlier, that 70k Execution Sentence crit was followed up by a 40k non-crit Wake of Ashes, resulting in what was essentially a one-shot. We'll go into this clip in more detail later on. The level 75 talents provide us with 3 viable options. If you're facing a team with a melee or a hunter, Eye for an Eye will always be a safe bet due to its huge boost against physical damage every minute to counter offensives. Here you're able to see just how powerful Eye for an Eye is, as I survive on really low health without needing to use my Divine Shield, even though I didn't receive any significant healing for almost 15 seconds. Whenever you're facing a team without any physical damage dealers, you're left with a choice between Cavalier and Unbreakable Spirit, which is much more nuanced. While at first glance it may seem like Cavalier is the more offensive talent and Unbreakable Spirit is the more defensive talent, this is not the case. We say this because both talents can be utilized in both an offensive and defensive manner. For example, although you can pair Cavalier with every freedom to be more offensive and chase your target, you're also left with more options for when it comes to retreating behind a pillar and avoiding damage. Seeing the Boomkin here land a Cyclone on my healer and then use his offensive gives me an excellent opportunity to use Cavalier to retreat behind a pillar and ensure my survival. The same goes for Unbreakable Spirit. Having access to Divine Shield more often simply means that you can survive more, but it also means you'll be able to play much more aggressive more often due to having your biggest defensive cooldown available earlier than you otherwise would have. Also, having access to your shield more often will also play a part in both increased survival and increased damage. So, it's difficult to say which talent between the two is best. Both seem viable, and it will probably just come down to the matchup you're playing, with shorter games against high mobile targets favouring Cavalier, and longer games against low mobile targets favouring Unbreakable Spirit. Next, in the level 90 tier, we have a pretty straightforward choice, this time mostly down to actual numbers. Word of Glory is extremely strong on the beta right now, and the other talents don't even come close to its value. Here I'm able to get my entire team from around 40% to 70%. With that being said, if Word of Glory's healing is significantly brought down, then Selfless Healer may become the more viable option of the two. The final tier brings somewhat of a discussion between the two viable options, Inquisition and Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose provides you with the potential to deal the highest burst, as it can be used to buff the damage of your Execution Sentence by 30%. That clip from earlier showing Execution Sentence critting for over 70k was used with the Divine Purpose proc. However, Divine Purpose does come with its fair share of problems. These are the low frequency of procs and bad proc timing. This clip clearly demonstrates how poor the proc chance can be, with over 50 seconds passing before I get a proc. And to make matters worse, this clip even doubles up as a great example of how badly a Divine Purpose proc can be timed. I get this proc just after using a Templar's Verdict. This is the absolute worst case scenario because I want to use my procs on Execution Sentence whenever possible, and I never want to use Execution Sentence without Judgment. This means I basically have to wait until Judgment comes back off cooldown without being able to use my Divine Purpose proc if I want to maximize my burst potential, which is essentially the point of playing with Divine Purpose. Inquisition, on the other hand, provides you with a more stable damage increase and the ability to burst on demand without having to wait for a Divine Purpose proc. It's for this reason that we recommend Inquisition as the talent of choice in this tier. It also buffs the damage of your Wake of Ashes, which pigeonholes your burst less as you no longer rely on just an Execution Sentence crit and can also benefit from a buffed Wake of Ashes crit. Unfortunately, this means that Crusade simply does not stand out in this tier. Not only do you have to first stack up your damage, but you also miss out on the 20% crit and healing increase that Avenging Wrath provides. This may change later on in the expansion at higher gear levels where crit from the Avenging Wrath becomes less important, but for now, Crusade is out of the picture. So, to conclude this tier, while we recommend using Inquisition, the decision is yours and can still come down to personal preference. Before we move on, here's one more look at our recommended talents. Next, we'll take a look at your PvP talents. Starting with your trinket choice, Gladiator's Medallion is the most consistent and versatile option. It allows you to break crowd control while Avenging Wrath is up, which is very important when Ret is in its current state, relying heavily on wings to do anything significant. And it also gives you the option to use your trinket defensively, either to survive yourself or to help your teammates survive. The other two options pale in comparison to Gladiator's Medallion. Adaptation is very unreliable and can be exploited by the opposing team, forcing you to sit in the CC of their choice. And Relentless poses the same problem as Adaptation, as it presents the opportunity for teams to keep you at bay during your Avenging Wrath without you being able to do anything. Now, in BFA, we get to choose 3 PvP talents from a pool of options. We're going to break this down into 3 categories: talents you always take, talents you almost always take, and optional talents that you will change around. Lawbringer is the only talent you will always take. It provides you with a consistent DPS increase and is flexible in that it increases both your single target and spread damage. Next, you will almost always be using Law and Order. This can actually be viewed as your biggest DPS increase. Being able to consistently apply a 70% slow can make it very difficult for targets to avoid your damage without committing mobility, something that they won't always be able to do. Not only that, but it can also be a great defensive tool, allowing you to effectively control your opposition's movement speed more often, allowing you to kite damage or even slow someone pushing in to CC your healer. Also, as we mentioned earlier in this video, the synergy between Law and Order and Blade of Wrath increases this talent's potency, allowing you to keep more targets slowed more often. All in all, this talent is incredibly effective and should be taken 90% of the time. Finally, let's take a look at your optional talents. First, we have Jurisdiction. Having access to a longer range stun provides you with a ton of flexibility when it comes to stunning healers while you're attacking a DPS, something that indirectly increases your damage. This can be extremely valuable when playing comps like Ret Hunter, as it will enable your hunter to consistently land traps even when you're far away from the opposing healer. Next, we have Blessing of Sanctuary, which currently only seems to be important versus Rogue Mage. Most other matchups tend to be very slow paced, so increasing your damage or other utility potentially yields more value than increasing your team's defensive capabilities. Rogue Mage, however, has a ton of burst potential, making Sank seem 100% necessary. This is likely to start applying to other comps as we get into the first season of BFA. Now, if you're happy to lose some utility and instead want to focus on just talents that provide a DPS increase, you're left with one of 3 options. Hammer of Reckoning gives you access to wings for 6 seconds every 60 seconds. This gives you the option of delaying your Wake of Ashes by 15 seconds in order to more frequently execute your maximum burst sequence with Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes, and Templar's Verdict while wings are up. However, if you prefer a more steady DPS increase, Divine Punisher can be used. Just be aware that you need to maximize how often you use 2 consecutive judgments on the same target in order to get the most value out of it. Your third option for damage is Vengeance Aura. While this talent may provide the highest potential for a damage increase, it's very rare you'll consistently have it stacked to 4, so it's difficult to gauge how strong it is and may come down to the matchup. And of course, if you want max DPS with no utility, you can drop Law and Order and take your choice of 2 from Hammer of Reckoning, Divine Punisher, and Vengeance Aura. Let's wrap up this section by recapping what your realistic builds could look like. First, if you want to maximize both your damage and utility, you want to use Lawbringer, Law and Order, and either Jurisdiction or Blessing of Sanctuary, depending on the matchup. If you want to sacrifice some utility while increasing your kill potential, you'll want to use Lawbringer, Law and Order, and one of the 3 DPS talents, we recommend Hammer of Reckoning. However, if you're happy to forego all utility and just want to focus on damage, you'll want to use Lawbringer and then 2 of Hammer of Reckoning, Divine Punisher, and Vengeance Aura. These are of course just examples of the most common builds you'll be using, and there are going to be alternate builds that are matchup specific. So, use the information in this section as a good baseline to start with, but don't be afraid to experiment with different combinations. Next, we have a new addition to Battle for Azeroth, Azerite traits. You're able to select 3 traits from a pool of many on your head, shoulders, and chest. However, each item is unique in that it will only offer a small pool of traits from all of the ones that are available in the game. So, what does this mean for you? Well, the first trait you get to choose from provides you with by far the most value. Unfortunately for Ret Paladins, there only seems to be one great first trait right now, which means that when it comes to leveling up to 120 on live servers, you're going to want to hunt down gear with the Avenger's Might trait. Avenger's Might increases your mastery while Avenging Wrath is up. This ties in well with how Ret revolves entirely around setting up huge burst windows with wings. This particular trait can actually be stacked 3 times. This means that if you're able to get this trait on your head, shoulders and chest, you'll get that same mastery buff stacked 3 times. It's worth noting that not every trait can be stacked 3 times. The only other trait that seems like it may provide some value in PvP if it can be stacked 3 times is Furious Wrath. Unfortunately, this trait is not on any of the items currently available on the beta, and so we haven't been able to test it in PvP. This means that almost every other first trait seems rather underwhelming in PvP. None of the Paladin specific ones really stand out as being great options. In fact, I opted for Standards 1, a PvP trait on my chest on the beta, as Avenger's Might wasn't on any of the available chests. Anduin's Dedication may also be a decent choice as it increases your primary stat. As for the second and third trait, well, because you're going to be chasing gear that has your optimal first trait, your second and third traits are sort of going to be a situation where you get what you're given. On the beta, the only trait that actually stands out as being decent is Earthlink, providing you with a non-static strength increase. And once you've chosen your 3 traits, you can complete your gear with a 5 item level increase. Moving on, stats have made a return to instanced PvP in BFA. From our extensive research, it seems Ret will want to play one of 2 builds, either combining Haste and Mastery, or Mastery and Versatility. In this first build, which we generally recommend, Haste and Mastery provides you with the most consistent damage while also giving you the most bang for your buck in terms of increasing your burst. On the beta, with a Haste over Mastery build, I have 20% Haste and 40% Mastery. But with a Mastery over Haste build, I have 15% Haste and 48% Mastery. Both builds seem to offer a similar amount of DPS, but Mastery over Haste may end up being better due to the increased burst without losing too much sustained. An alternative build is Mastery over Versatility. This will give you the most burst possible, but definitely feels like more of a gimmick due to the significant reduction in overall pressure. When playing this build, we generally recommend using Divine Purpose instead of Inquisition, as it better suits what this build is made for. The remaining stat, Crit, does not seem too good right now because you get 20% crit from Avenging Wrath, weakening its value on gear. Crit damage is also nerfed in PvP, making it even less valuable. So, when it comes to the live game once you hit max level, at first you'll want to chase gear with any combination of Haste, Mastery and Versatility, while avoiding gear with Crit. You can then later on try to specialize in your build of choice. As for enchants, we're currently using Mastery on rings and weapon, but you can also opt for Haste on rings and attack speed on your weapon. Something else we'd like to quickly mention are trinkets. A great guideline to follow is to pair an unused trinket with a proc trinket. On the PvP side of things, this is made easy by pairing a Gladiator's badge with a Gladiator's insignia. Even when you bring PvE trinkets into the equation, the Gladiator's badge still stands out as an excellent choice for buffing the strength of your wings. However, you're then left with more options for your second trinket. One of the standout PvE trinkets currently available in the beta is the Prism of Dark Intensity. Bear in mind, it's entirely possible that PvE trinkets get nerfed in PvP, and the response will simply be to pair that Gladiator's badge with the Gladiator's insignia. The final part of this character build is on your race. With the changes to old racials in BFA and the introduction of new races, many players are wondering what race they should be playing, and if it's worth re-rolling, race changing, or faction changing to the ideal race. Alliance has 3 very viable races. Humans stand out as being the safest option, allowing for an extra stun removal in the form of every man for themselves. Just be aware that using it puts your Gladiator's Medallion on cooldown for 1 minute. If you're looking for a race that increases your damage, both Lightforged Draenei and Dark Iron Dwarf provide a significant increase to your burst. Again, this clip we showed you earlier showcased the Lightforged Draenei bursting, and it's their racial, Light's Judgment, that actually allowed for this one shot to happen, as it hits for around 30k. Dark Iron Dwarfs on the other hand may actually provide more damage than Lightforged Draenei's, however it comes at the cost of putting your trinket on cooldown for 30 seconds, and it also doesn't increase your burst in the way that Light's Judgment currently does. It's for this reason that, with the numbers the way they are at the moment, we recommend avoiding Dark Iron Dwarf and just sticking to Lightforged Draenei if you want a racial that increases your damage. As for Horde, Blood Elves are the only real viable race, and are definitely much weaker than the Alliance races. Their racial has the potential to provide some cool utility by removing an important buff from your target. However, it being on the GCD and it only removing one buff means that the opportunities where this can be game breaking may be few and far between. So to summarize, Alliance definitely has the better racials. However, you'll need to consider what your best comps are and what the best races are for the classes you play with once we get later into BFA. For now, understand that all 4 of the races we covered are viable in their own way and are unlikely to be what holds you back at the beginning of Battle for Azeroth. Before we end this video, we'd like to give you a quick rundown of how ret damage works, what an ideal opener looks like, and how to execute your burst. The basics of dealing damage as a Ret Paladin is for you to generate holy power with the Blade of Justice and Crusader Strike. You then use Judgment, if available, to buff your next finisher. Note that Judgment also generates 1 holy power. And finally, you spend your holy power on Templar's Verdict. You can also generate holy power with Wake of Ashes and spend it on Execution Sentence, but these 2 abilities are the key to your burst, so we'll discuss them later. As for cleaving, well, with the current numbers, ret cleave is not too high, so you should avoid using Divine Storm and instead focus on single target damage and burst. Next, let's take a look at how your talent choice between Inquisition and Divine Purpose affects your overall goals for dealing damage. When playing with Inquisition, you'll want to prioritize 100% uptime on this buff. You can use a 2 holy power Inquisition in the opener after your first Blade of Justice, but you'll then want to try and use only 3 holy power ones after that. And when playing with Divine Purpose, you'll want to prioritize using your procs on Execution Sentence whenever possible, otherwise you can just use them on Templar's Verdict. Now, your opener and burst sequence will look a little different depending on if you're playing with Divine Purpose or Inquisition. With Inquisition, you're in control of your ramp up and simply need to get Inquisition up, generate at least 2 holy power, and you're ready to burst. You want to use Judgment, Wings, Execution Sentence, Wake of Ashes, Templar's Verdict, Blade of Justice or Crusader Strike, and Templar's Verdict again. With current tuning, this burst sequence is likely to drop someone extremely low, and if timed with your teammate's burst, has the potential of instantly scoring a kill. However, if you're playing with Divine Purpose, you're less in control of when you can burst, and instead need to wait for a Divine Purpose proc. This is because you want to use the Divine Purpose proc to buff the damage of your Execution Sentence. Once you get to proc, you're ready to burst with the same burst sequence. Taking one last look at that clip from earlier, Judgment is already applied. Wings is then used, followed up with Light's Judgment, the Lightforged Draenei racial, which makes bursting with Divine Purpose capable of one-shotting your target. This is followed up by Execution Sentence and Wake of Ashes. Bear in mind that a lot of damage modifiers are being used here with a stacked Vengeance Aura and Earthlink. Outside of bursting with Avenging Wrath, you're able to replicate this exact same burst sequence with Hammer of Reckoning every 60 seconds. Just replace Avenging Wrath with Hammer of Reckoning and you're good to go. Note that you'll only be able to use 4 globals with your Reckoning Wings, which means you'll only get 1 Templar's Verdict out. Alright everyone, that's it for this video on getting started as a Ret Paladin in patch 8.0. We've got these guides coming out for every spec in the lead up to BFA, so keep an eye on the new videos feed for any classes you're interested in. Thanks for watching and good luck in Battle for Azeroth.